Just a few videos ago, I talked about the possibility of Paul George joining the Knicks, and let's just say that the comments let me have it. As long as Fibs wouldn't run Paul George into the ground, Paul George going to New York sounded like one of those things that could be mutually beneficial. But despite the Knicks having a ton of role players with upside, which is exactly what that old Clippers team needs, and the Knicks needing one more piece to help them get over the hump, a lot of Knicks fans just don't want a Paul George who made 34 last month. Although the smoke around Paul George going to the Knicks would momentarily dissipate with it coming out that the Knicks never actually seriously pursued PG, it seems like there's a chance that things are going to heat back up for them. According to Mark Stein, the Knicks are a trade suitor to watch for Paul George if he opts in. Now, to my surprise, there were also a lot of Clippers fans who were also out on the former MVP candidate, actually being happy at the possibility that he might leave. For those Clippers fans who are rooting for a Paul George departure, I have some giant news that you will definitely want to hear. But first, for those of you who don't know, Underdog Fantasy is not only the easiest way to play fantasy sports, but it's also the fastest growing app in the industry. With Underdog Fantasy, there are a ton of ways to have fun. Personally, I have a lot of fun with their pick'em game. All you have to do is pick between 2 and 8 players and decide whether those players will have a higher or lower stat for said game, and you get the chance to win big. I've been using Underdog Fantasy to lock back in on soccer with the Euros and Copa America going on, and I've been having a blast. When you sign up for Underdog, make sure that you use code COOP so you could get up to $250 in bonus cash on your first deposit, and a special limited time bonus square to help you win big. Follow me on IG to see my picks before anybody else, and thank you Underdog for the sponsor. What is tampering in today's NBA? According to the infamous sportingnews.com, tampering is when a coach, player, executive, or owner speaks with a player on another team with the intention to lure him to join their team. This also includes when an entity publicly shows interest in acquiring a player or approaches their agent about a possible trade. If you were to ask me, the rules about tampering seem incredibly clear. Now look at what Joel Embiid does here during a broadcast for the NBA Finals and tell me that he isn't trying to tamper without actually tampering.
I can't stand them. I hate Boston. Great city, great fans. Obviously they got some great players, but he hurts me a lot. So hopefully, this offseason we find a way to get better and, add some pieces. And,
add some pieces.
Pause it right there. Wait a minute. Stop the show. Let's go back and rewind to when Joel Embiid said that he hopes that the 76ers are able to add some help this offseason. When he says this, pay attention to his eyes. As he says that he hopes that the 76ers are able to get some help, he side-eyes Paul George, who, go figure, has been heavily linked to the 76ers this summer. In fact, at one point it was believed that Paul George was actually this team's top option in free agency. I say at one point because despite the hints of Joel Embiid, something seems to have changed on the Paul George front for the 76ers, as it's now being reported that the 76ers are losing interest in Paul George. Funnily enough, this comes after Paul George said that Morey's reputation could influence his free agency decision. This was about the worst thing that Paul George could say if he had any sort of desire to go to Philadelphia, which even if he had no desire of becoming a Sixer, at worst, the Sixers being a threat to sign him would have worked in his favor, raising his value. Mike Scotto is saying that there's still significant interest there, but I don't know, man. I'm not sure that Morey was too enthused about George's comments. So with the 76ers cooling down on Paul George, Shams would say that they're expected to be aggressive elsewhere with their salary cap, flexibility, and draft capital, which we've already started to see some names surface as the 76ers pivot away from PG. To name a few, Zach LaVine and my Pelicans' Brandon Ingram. And yes, we will be dropping videos exploring the futures of both of these players, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications if you haven't done so already, because you won't want to miss a video during this crazy offseason. I'm sort of disappointed that Shams reported that the 76ers' interest in Paul George was dying down. Albeit a short and injury-prone year, Joel Embiid is coming off of one of the craziest seasons that I've ever seen a center have. He averaged 34.7 points, 11 rebounds, and 5.6 assists, shooting a staggering 52.9% from the field and 38.8% from deep. Yeah, guys, Embiid was a beast this past season when he was healthy. The 76ers really do have some serious potential. Don't forget, they have Tyrese Maxey too, who showed that his game isn't done growing. 25.9 points, 3.7 rebounds, and 6.2 assists is what this man averaged at just 23 years old. That right there is special. I'm telling you guys, Paul George going to the 76ers could be a lot of fun if everybody stayed healthy. The 76ers are one of the few teams that could have paid Paul George like a superstar, not asked him to give them the world every single night, and still be a contender all at the same time, which at 35 years old sounds like a pretty sweet deal for Paul George, or so you would think. Paul George would give us some insight on what he wants from his next team, and contending was not on top of the list. On his podcast, he'd say, "At this point, it's not even about chasing a championship. It's not that. It's about playing the right style of basketball. That's what I'm chasing." So Paul George is prioritizing playing the right way. Maybe it's a pure coincidence that he's saying something like this coming off of a season where he played with James the System Harden, an incredibly effective player, but also an incredibly ball-dominant player. Or maybe him saying this isn't a coincidence at all. Mind you that on his podcast, he would also say this: "We started off the year hot. Everybody was playing well. The energy was there. It was kind of like the first time of us all being healthy with Russ now. It was the emergence of what it's like being with Russ now, with myself healthy, Kawhi healthy, and Russ full-time here. It was kind of like a fresh start. Then we traded to get James. And it's not James' fault of why we struggled, but the lost part of that was we lost Rocco, we lost Nico. Now you grab James, who is super talented offensively. Now myself, Kawhi, we become the dirty guys." So Paul George would continue to emphasize that Harden wasn't the problem, but despite not outright calling Harden the problem, he did outline the problems that trading for Harden caused. Paul George understands that as constructed, the Clippers aren't built to win. He also understands that if he returns to Los Angeles and they simply run things back, he's going to have to be a dirty guy at 34 years old, which honestly sounds like a disaster for every single party involved. Last season, the Clippers were an old team with a lot of mileage. Running it back a year older just doesn't make any sense to me, which I have a nasty feeling that this is going to be what happens. If I'm a Clippers fan, I'm definitely rooting for some drastic moves to shake this team up, because it needs to get younger, and it needs better depth and quality role players in the worst way possible. What really sucks for the Clippers here is that this team is basically forced to try to be as good as possible with them not outright owning their own first-round pick until 2030. With them not owning their first-round pick until 2030, they're kind of at the mercy of Paul George here. You either pay an aging Paul George a ton of money and he stays, or you stand your ground and he leaves you for nothing. Like Wendy said, there's always that possibility that you can pull off a sign and trade or a straight up trade with him opting in. But again, that all depends on him. And he hasn't exactly been doing his market any favors saying things like he isn't prioritizing winning a championship. Now don't get confused. This isn't me saying that there's no market for Paul George. As Windhorst said, there still very much is. This is my way of saying that Paul George just has a way with words. Now, another team aside from the Knicks and 76ers that I've seen show interest in Paul George is the Orlando Magic. We covered this a bit in my last Paul George video, but since the last time that we covered it, Paul George would show a lot of love to the Magic on his podcast, calling the Magic a team that surprised him this year. But speaking of surprises, it gets even better with some surprise teams being added to this whole Paul George mess. The teams that I'm referencing here are the Golden State Warriors and the Houston Rockets. Mike Scotto says that him landing in Houston is unlikely, but the Rockets are currently a team that is big game hunting, so watch out. While Brett Siegel calls the Warriors a team to keep a very close eye on if Klay Thompson were to actually leave, which this Klay Thompson situation is something that we will cover very soon in another video, so again, be sure to subscribe and turn on those notifications. If the Warriors are actually interested in Paul George, then that tells me a bit about the direction that this team plans to head in as we inch closer and closer to the end of Curry's career. Like I said earlier, guys, there's a lot going on this offseason and we're just getting started. Guys, let me know what you think of this Paul George situation in the comments below. Would you be open to your team signing or trading for Paul George? What team do you think would be the best fit for PG? Clicking the video on the screen right now and using code COOP for Underdog Fantasy are great ways to support my channel. I'm GetLikeCoop, bringing you guys the scoop until our next upload.